Carnivore Soldier coming at you from Austin, Texas with another movie review. This one is Fat, a documentary from 2019. Directed by Peter Pardini and starring Vinnie Tortorich. So the movie starts out with Jim Abrams being interviewed, and he's a famous producer. He produced Airplane, Hot Shots, and the Naked Gun series, which I grew up loving. Anyway, he had a child in the 90s that had severe epileptic seizures. Life-threatening probably, and he, being a man of means with no limits to what he could spend really compared to the rest of us, he went and took his child to the best care providers in the world, and they prescribed every drug known to man at the time, and even when none of them worked, even did brain surgery on their little toddler who was, a little over 1 year old, maybe around 2. And after nothing worked, all these doctors just threw their hands up in the air and said, there's nothing to be done. Just be prepared for a life of slow progression towards retardation. And your child is going to be disabled. And it was crushing. So he went down to the medical library because he had nowhere else to turn. And he found a pamphlet on epilepsy and treatment by a ketogenic diet. And it blew him away because it said that 60% of the chance of eating this ketogenic diet will either make the epileptic seizures go away completely or make them much more manageable. And it really blew him away. So then he went back to his doctors and he's like, why did you not bring this up to me? And the doctor's like, well, we hadn't exhausted all the medical treatments we knew about. And just, it pisses you off from a parent's point of view, because if you had a child that had that going on and you were given 3 options instead of 2, drug your kid, brain surgery, or change what you're eating, change what you're feeding him, what would you pick, right? Every parent, 9 out of 10 parents, 99 out of 100 would say change what you're eating first, right? That's the low-hanging fruit, especially when it has such a great success rate. So that was the emotional buy-in for the movie. It really was. It gets you, it's like you're pissed off at the parent. You want to find out, why did this happen? And it gets you emotionally hooked in right away. So then the movie dives into food myths, which is really awesome because that's what we're all facing right now. That's why we all grew up on these food myths, right? And it talks about the origins of food myths, the ones, especially the ones that we're dealing with now. And the origins of the food myths actually trace their history back to the Seventh-day Adventists in 1860, who had a vision from God that told her that we humans shouldn't be eating anything with a face, which was the birth of the modern day vegan message and diet. And if that wasn't crazy enough, she was joined by John Kellogg a little later, famous for Kellogg's cereals. And so John Kellogg believed that eating meat drove sexual desire and sexual immorality. So Kellogg's, his actual cereal, was designed to curb sexual immorality in America, which is pretty crazy, right? But while he was developing the cereal, he actually developed dextridization, which is basically cooking down grains until they become a dextrose or a sugar. And it talks about dextrose. Whenever you see dextrose in a food, that is sugar. It is dextridization of a grain, where the grain is actually cooked down into a sugar. So it's very interesting on that. That's how that whole thing started, was trying to correct our sexual immorality in America. So. And then it talks about this great Arctic explorer, Wilhelm Stefaner, I think his name was. And he was a believer of plant nutrition being required for maintaining good health. So he believed that you need to eat meat and plants were very important for good health. He went to the Arctic Circle to study the Inuit and was stuck up there for a winter in 1906. And to his surprise, all he ate was caribou and fish, which is all they ate, and seal. That's all they ate. And to his surprise, his health was never better than when he was up there. So he came back down from the Arctic Circle, and no one believed his story. So he was kind of frustrated because people discounted him, even though he had experienced it himself. And all the Inuit were supremely healthy and not eating any greens up in the Arctic Circle. So he subjected himself and a fellow explorer to something called the Belmont Study, which was a 1-year study where they were in Belmont Hospital, I guess that's New York or something, and they were there for a year, and they were given what to eat. It was just a high-fat, high-meat diet, and I think it was a meat association that paid for it. It was like a meat Meat Association of America or something like that. They paid for the study, and he and the other subject of the study were in great health. And the only time they got sick was when they put them on a high protein, low fat diet for a while. And they both got sick. Then they switched them back to the high fat, high protein, zero carb diet, which they were on, which is basically carnivore. And they both were completely healthy. And by the end, I think there were 7 studies that came out of that, or 7 papers were published out of that study from different doctors. And they were all trying to show that it wouldn't be good, but they couldn't. They basically said, hey, these guys are as healthy as you can be. They have no vitamin deficiencies, no scurvy, nothing. So it basically, that whole study is awesome because it proves what we're doing here, right? It proves that what we're doing is correct. And what the Inuit live and what the Maasai live and different tribes that are full carnivores, they're not sick. And I'm not sick, you know? So it's a great, like I said, this is a great talking point if you're sharing this with people that are skeptics. If they have a critical mind and they watch this, it's going to make them question the narrative they've heard. So it was interesting, all these studies and the science had been done showing that a carnivore diet or a meat, fat and protein diet was very healthy for you. And they were done in the 20s and leading up to the 20s. And then all that knowledge seemed to have gotten lost during the Great Depression and the war when everyone went into survival mode. So it talks about that, that no one was worried about optimum nutrition. They were worried about living, not starving to death. And they were worried about surviving a war that was worldwide. So that information was lost. And then no one really focused on diet again until the 50s. And they, again, just like that sugar film. So they talk about when Dwight D. Eisenhower had his heart attack in 1955, how that was the driver of the 2 competing theories of what causes heart disease, because heart disease had lifted up, in the 20s, heart disease was not a top 10 killer. By the 1930s, I think it was number 1. And so people were starting to die of heart disease, and this is a previously unheard of disease. In 1900, it just didn't happen. So this is brand new. And they thought, well, everyone kind of had a consensus. Okay, it's diet. We know it's diet, but there were 2 competing theories. One was the sugar and one was the fat. And of course the fat won. So Ansel Keys came into the picture and was a ramrod with the fat message, saying, he basically outshouted. He was definitely a narcissist. He didn't even have all the data. He did a 7-country study where he only picked 7 out of, I think, the 40 countries that had data, so he could show a correlation with those 7, but none of the other countries actually had the correlation. So it really was sketchy. It wasn't real science, and he just wanted to be right. So he drove this whole fat and cholesterol message that really changed the way all Western diet worked, that everyone went to a low fat, low cholesterol diet that turned out to be disastrous, as we see now, right? So sugar was fine. You could eat all the sugar you wanted, and a calorie is a calorie. It all gets talked about in here in real excellent depth, including the McGovern Committee, which was in the 70s, where George McGovern was trying to address nationwide poverty, and they come up with nutritional guidelines. And the guidelines they came up with were 180 degrees wrong. And it's funny because it wasn't even scientists that came up with the guidelines. These were staffers and politicians. And like when they talked about the food pyramid, that was all just kind of, they basically spent years and years on this committee and didn't come up with anything because there's no scientific evidence for their argument. So they just made something up. And a bunch of staffers, they were getting pressured to, bring something to the table. So they did. So that has affected everything we've done. I grew up in the 60s and 70s as a kid, so I ate a pretty healthy meal. We had food we made at home. There was some processed food, but not very much. I mean, even our salad dressing my mom would make with buttermilk, and she would make her own stuff. So after the 80s, that's when all food became totally processed, low fat, everything's low cholesterol. And that's when we saw the major problems start just accelerate radically in America, and actually in the Western world. America first, obviously, because we were advanced in our food manufacturing. So that's that part of the movie. And then it talks about the next step is the pharmaceutical companies jump in because they're like, oh, low cholesterol, cool, let's make some drugs for that, let's make some money, right? So they start making statins. They start developing the statins. And of course, everyone knows that's what they love statins because that's their prescription for a lifetime, or subscription for a lifetime prescription, right? They want guys on there forever. And they don't want you to die. They want you to live, but they want you paying every month and your insurance company paying every month. That's what they want. And very interesting how that works. So it just talks about how everything just got on this momentum started rolling, and it all starts from the Seventh-day Adventists and rolls all the way up to today. And then they show all the presidents talking about all these great initiatives they're taking to make people in America healthy. And in the background while they're all talking, it just shows the fat rate and the diabetes rate and the cancer rate and all the diseases of civilization just going up as they keep talking. So anyway, it's really interesting. Great movie. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more detailed information in it. Worth watching at least once, maybe twice. Very entertaining. You're not going to have to get up and take a break. It's not overwhelming. Vinnie is a great host, and so are the other experts. They're really entertaining. They're really, I think Dr. Drew's on there. There's a lot of great celebrity doctors and people that we're familiar with from seeing on different documentaries or on YouTube talking about carnivore or high fat, low carb diets, or zero carb diets even, or keto. So these are some famous people, journalists and doctors. So it's worth watching. It's a great movie to introduce your family members and friends if they're concerned about you. You can say, hey, let's watch this movie together. Why don't you watch it? Let me know what you think. I think it's fantastic. It's better than the sugar movie. I think if you put those two together, you get a really much more complete picture of, how bad sugar is. Plus, it's not just not eating sugar, it's eating fat, and more specifically, animal fats that's healthy. And that's what this movie really talks about in fat. At the end, there's an excellent call to action that Vinnie gives out. And it's like, do this now, do it right now. Don't wait till tomorrow. And it's really good. So I think, it's, if you want to get motivated, that'll motivate you too, but also you can share it with others and they can see, maybe they'll get motivated to do it. Now, there is a second part to this movie, Fat 2, and I haven't watched it yet, but I'm really looking forward to adding that down the road to my queue. If you like my content, please like and subscribe to the channel, and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you get notified when these videos come out. I try to put a lot of interesting and different content out. If there's any movies that you want to see reviewed, please drop a comment down there, or you can join me on Wednesdays, because Wednesdays I'm doing a live stream at 7 p.m. CST. It's a Carnivore Hump Day Hangout, and you can drop in there and tell me if there's any movies I should check out there too. So I appreciate you guys' viewership, and all I got to say is stay strong and overcome. Carnivore Soldier, out.